My wedding dress was still on. My bouquet was still in my hands. The flowers, white peonies and dusty rose, were trembling slightly because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The music had stopped mid-song. The jazz trio had gone completely silent, every one of them frozen with their instruments half raised, watching. 212 people were staring at me, not at the altar, not at the officiant, at me. And my own mother, the woman who carried me for 9 months, who I had called every Sunday for 30 years out of loyalty and love and sheer stubborn hope, was standing in the middle of my ceremony, holding a microphone she had stolen from the DJ table, telling my guests that this whole wedding was a mistake, that I was a mistake. She looked directly at me, not at the crowd, not at Daniel, directly at me, and she said, loud enough for every single person in that room to hear, "Brianna doesn't deserve any of this. She never did." And my father stood right beside her, not uncomfortable, not embarrassed, nodding, like she was reading a grocery list and he was confirming the items. The woman next to me, my best friend Kayla, grabbed my arm. I felt her fingers tighten. She whispered, "Bree." Just that, just my name, like a question and a warning and a prayer all at once. I took one breath. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't collapse. I didn't turn to Daniel with wide, helpless eyes begging him to fix it. I straightened my spine, I lifted my chin, I turned and I walked, slowly, deliberately, every step landing like a period at the end of a sentence, directly toward my mother. I reached into the hidden pocket of my wedding dress. Yes, I had planned for this, and yes, I will explain exactly why, and I pulled out my phone. I took that microphone from my mother's hand so smoothly it was almost gentle, and I pressed play. What came out of those speakers ended everything. Their carefully constructed lie, their golden story, their perfect, golden, untouchable daughter, all of it burned down in 47 seconds of audio. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever heard in my life. If you are new here, welcome. I'm so glad you found this. My name is Brianna, and this channel is where I tell the truth about my life, the parts that are hard to say out loud, the parts that took years to understand, and the parts that eventually set me free. I have never told this story in full, not publicly, not like this, but today feels like the right day and you feel like the right people to tell it to. So if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications, grab something to drink, and get comfortable, because this story has a lot of layers, and I am not going to rush a single one of them. Every second of what I am about to share with you matters. Let's go back to the beginning. My name is Brianna Calloway. I grew up in Maryville, Tennessee, a small town just outside of Knoxville, tucked up against the foothills of the Smoky Mountains. It's the kind of place where the air smells like pine trees and cut grass in the summer, and where everybody goes to the same church, eats the same diners, and knows your family tree going back 3 generations. It's beautiful, that town. I want to be honest about that. I have good memories from it, walking to school through the leaves in October, Friday night football games, summers at the community pool. There were real moments of joy in that place. But a town that small also means that the story your family tells about itself is the only story that exists. And in my family, the story had very clearly defined roles. My father, Robert Calloway, was a quiet, steady man, an engineer. He worked long hours, he provided well, he was not cruel. But he was also not emotionally present in the way that children need a parent to be. He led through absence. If you didn't make waves, he didn't notice you, and that was considered a success. He saved his attention for the moments when something made him proud, and the thing that made him most proud was Madison. My mother, Carol Calloway, was a different story entirely. She was the kind of woman who ran everything: the PTA, the church bake sale, the neighborhood block party, with total precision and a bright, convincing smile. She was beloved in Maryville. Everyone thought she was wonderful. She kept a beautiful house and raised 3 children and always showed up with a casserole when someone was sick. But at home, behind the casseroles and the smile, there was a hierarchy, and it had been established long before I arrived. My older sister, Madison Calloway, was what my parents called their first miracle. She was born 5 years before me, and from the very beginning, she was treated like the answer to everything my parents had ever hoped for. Blonde hair, blue eyes, confident, magnetic. She was the kind of child who never had to be told twice to smile for a photo. She just knew how. She just knew how to be exactly what people wanted to see. My little brother Tyler came 4 years after me, and he was the baby, which gave him a different kind of grace. He got love by default. Nobody expected too much of him because he was the youngest. He floated through the family dynamics with a gentleness that I always admired and sometimes envied. And then there was me, the middle, the one who didn't have a lane. I want you to understand something. I was not a difficult child. I was not a problem. I was not rebellious or hard or damaged, at least not at first. I was a normal, curious, hard-working little girl who wanted exactly what every child wants: to be seen, to be loved, to matter to the people who were supposed to matter most. But in the Calloway house, the spotlight had only one setting, and it pointed at Madison. Let me give you some specific examples, because I think the specific details are what make people really understand how this works. It's not usually one dramatic event. It's the accumulation. It's the 1,000 tiny moments that stack up over years until they build a wall so high you can't see over it. I was 12 years old when I won first place at the Blount County Regional Science Fair. First place out of 230 students. My project was on water filtration. I had built a working model of a 3-stage filtration system out of household materials and tested its effectiveness against tap water samples. I had worked on it for 3 months. My science teacher, Mr. Hendricks, told me it was one of the best projects he had ever seen from a student my age. I came home that afternoon holding that blue ribbon like it was made of actual gold. My mother was standing at the kitchen counter cutting vegetables for dinner. I walked in and I held it up. She looked at it, she smiled, and it was the smallest smile I have ever seen in my life. The kind of smile you give someone when they've done something mildly pleasant, but not really important. And she said, "That's nice, honey. Your sister got into the honors program today. We're going to take her out for dinner to celebrate. You should get changed." I stood there for another second, just one, and then I went upstairs, put the ribbon in the back of my desk drawer, and got changed for Madison's celebration dinner. I don't think I ever took that ribbon out of the drawer again. That was the moment I understood the rules of my family, and the rule was this: there was only room for one star in the Calloway family firmament. That star had been named before I was old enough to compete for the title, and no blue ribbon, no grade, no achievement of mine was going to change the assignment. As I got older, the pattern didn't change, it just got more sophisticated. When I made the varsity volleyball team as a sophomore, my parents attended exactly 2 games the entire season. When Madison auditioned for the community theater musical the same year and landed a supporting role, my parents attended every single performance, 3 weekends in a row, and took her to dinner afterward every time. When I got accepted to the University of Tennessee for marketing, my parents said, "Good, that should work out fine." When Madison was accepted to Vanderbilt 2 years earlier, there was a party. When I started showing signs of anxiety in my junior year of high school, when the weight of never being enough started to come out through panic attacks and trouble sleeping, my mother told me I was being dramatic. She told me that if I just chose to be happy, I would be. She told me that some people had real problems and I should count my blessings. So I stopped telling her things. That was the second big shift. The first was learning that my achievements didn't count. The second was learning that my pain didn't count either. And once you learn both of those things, you learn to live entirely inside yourself. You build internal walls. You become a very good actress. You get so good at performing fine that eventually you forget what fine actually feels like. I spent years in that performance. I kept showing up for Sunday dinners and holiday gatherings and birthday celebrations. I kept calling every week. I kept trying, in the quiet ways available to me, to build some kind of real connection with my parents. Because even when you know the rules are unfair, even when you've been taught 1,000 times that you are not the priority, the love doesn't disappear. You still want them. You still need them to show up for you, even knowing they probably won't. That hope is the most exhausting thing I have ever carried. But here's the thing I want to tell you. The thing that took me years and a lot of therapy and one very pivotal conversation with a woman named Dr. Sandra O'Coffer to understand. Being unseen for long enough doesn't make you disappear, it makes you necessary to yourself. It forces you to build something inside that nobody can take away because nobody was ever giving you anything to begin with. I built myself in secret. I grew in the dark. And when I finally got out of Maryville and into the world, I was ready. Not because anyone had prepared me, but because surviving my family made me stronger than I ever knew. I moved to Nashville at 22 with one suitcase, a used Honda Civic, and $1,100 in my checking account. I had no connections there, no family friends who could get me in a door, no safety net. I had a marketing degree and a stubborn refusal to move back to Maryville, and that was it. The first year was genuinely hard. I had 3 roommates in a 2-bedroom apartment in East Nashville. I was working as a junior coordinator at a small PR firm, making just enough to cover rent and groceries and not much else. I ate a lot of peanut butter. I stayed late at the office because the office was warm and the work distracted me from how alone I felt. But something else was also happening that I hadn't expected. Without my family's narrative around me, without the constant background noise of Madison's accomplishments drowning out my own, I started to hear myself more clearly. I started to understand what I was actually good at, what I actually wanted, who I actually was when the story wasn't being told for me. I turned out to be very good at my job. I had an instinct for it, for what people needed to hear, how to frame a message so it landed, how to see a situation from multiple angles and find the angle that served the goal. My boss, a sharp woman named Diane Whitaker, told me after 6 months that I was one of the most intuitive hires she had ever made. I held on to that for a long time. Someone who didn't have to love me chose to see me. That mattered more than I can fully explain. I got promoted at 14 months, got promoted again at 2.5 years. By the time I was 26, I was managing accounts and leading a team and making real money for the first time in my life. I bought a plant, then another plant. I got a small apartment of my own in Germantown with exposed brick and a big window. I filled it with books and good coffee and the particular kind of quiet that only exists when you have your own space that no one can walk into and rearrange. I made friends. Real ones, the kind who choose you. Kayla Williams had been my best friend since sophomore year of college, and she had followed me to Nashville 2 years after I moved. Renee Hartley I met at work. Different personalities, but both of them had this quality I was drawn to. They showed up. When they said they would be somewhere, they were there. When I called, they answered. It sounds so simple. To a lot of people, that's just normal. For me, it was revelatory. I started therapy at 24. Dr. Sandra O'Coffer's office was 15 minutes from my apartment, and she charged on a sliding scale. I walked in expecting to talk about work stress and walked out 2 hours later having cried about my mother in a way I hadn't known I needed to. I went back every week for 2 years. That work, learning to name the patterns I had grown up inside, learning to see them clearly without either dismissing them or being defined by them, that work changed everything. It didn't make me bitter, it made me precise. It gave me language for things I had only ever felt as background static, and it taught me, slowly and with great difficulty, that I was allowed to be angry about what had been done to me and still choose a life that wasn't about that anger. I chose the second part. It took everything I had, but I chose it. And then, when I was 26 years old, I went to Charlotte for a work conference, and everything else began. Daniel Mercer was not what I expected. Let me tell you what I had been used to. Before Daniel, I had dated men who were charming in the way that eventually reveals itself as performance. Men who were attentive for the first few weeks and then gradually, almost imperceptibly, became less present. Men who made me feel like the project of being loved by them was somehow always my responsibility. Men who, if I'm being completely honest with myself, I chose because they confirmed something I had been taught, that love was something you earned, something conditional, something always slightly out of reach. I had been in therapy long enough to see that pattern for what it was. I had read the books, I had done the journaling, I understood intellectually what I was doing, and then I would meet someone and the pattern would pull me in again like a current, and I would find myself paddling against it for the next 6 months until I was exhausted and alone again. It is one thing to name a wound, it is another thing entirely to stop putting your hand in the fire. Daniel was the first man I ever met who didn't feel like fire. We met on the second day of a 3-day marketing and communications conference in Charlotte, North Carolina. I was there representing one of my agency's major clients, a healthcare company that was about to launch a regional awareness campaign. Daniel was presenting on behalf of a tech platform that had partnered with several nonprofits in the area. I noticed him before he spoke because he was clearly nervous, like visibly, charmingly nervous. He was doing that thing where you rearrange your papers more times than necessary and drink water and then immediately regret drinking water. And when he started speaking, the nerves came through in this specific way. Not a stumble exactly, more like he cared too much about getting it right. Like the words mattered to him, and he was determined not to let them down. I respected that immediately. After his presentation during the coffee break, he walked to the refreshment table and very definitively tripped over the leg of a chair that had been pushed slightly into the aisle. He didn't fall. He did this kind of controlled lurch that ended with him saving his coffee but losing considerable dignity. He looked up, saw me watching, and for a half second I thought he was going to be embarrassed. Instead, he burst out laughing. The real kind, the kind that comes from the belly and doesn't perform itself for anyone. He laughed like he was completely alone in the room, and it was genuinely the funniest thing that had happened to him all week. I laughed too. He looked over at me, still smiling, and said, "I promise I don't do that at every conference." I said, "I was going to say the timing was impressive." He said, "I've been workshopping it for years." And that was it. That was the moment. Not fireworks, something quieter and truer than fireworks. Just the immediate, uncomplicated sense of, oh, this one is actually here. We talked for 4 hours that evening. At dinner, then at the hotel bar, then in the lobby when the bar closed. Not flirting, talking. Real talking, about our work and why we had chosen it, about the cities we'd lived in, about books we'd loved and books we'd lied about reading, about what we wanted our lives to actually look like in 10 years. He asked questions that were not small talk. He asked them like he needed the answers, like he was taking notes he intended to keep. And he remembered things, specific things I had mentioned in passing an hour earlier, and would circle back to them later in the conversation, connecting them to something new. No one had ever made me feel so comprehensively heard in my entire life. I drove back to my hotel room at midnight and sat on the edge of the bed in my conference clothes and thought, I am in very serious trouble. We exchanged numbers. He texted me at 7 a.m. the next morning before the conference reconvened just to say he had been thinking about something I'd said about storytelling in marketing and wanted to continue the conversation. 7 in the morning. No games, no calculated waiting period, just, I was thinking about what you said and I want to keep talking to you. I thought, This is going to change my life. We did long distance for 8 months. Nashville to Charlotte, back and forth, every other weekend, phone calls every night. Long calls, an hour, 2 hours, sometimes more. We were both busy people, but we both made the time without having to negotiate it or ask for it. It was just something we both wanted, so we both did it. And then his company offered him a position in Nashville. He told me about it on a Sunday phone call, and he said, "I think I'm going to take it." I said, "You don't have to do that for me." And he said, and I want you to really hear this because no one had ever said anything like this to me. He said, "Brianna, I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because of you. There's a difference. You're not a sacrifice. You're the reason." I held my phone against my chest after I hung up and I cried for 10 minutes. Not sad crying, not relieved crying, the crying that comes when something clicks into place after years of things being the wrong size. The crying that is really just, I didn't know it could feel like this. I didn't know I was allowed to be someone's reason. He moved to Nashville in March. We got our own apartment in April. He proposed in June on a completely ordinary Tuesday evening while I was sitting at the kitchen table in sweatpants eating cereal and reading emails. He had hidden the ring in the cabinet above the refrigerator, the one I never used because I couldn't reach it, and he had apparently been waiting for the exact right moment and decided that the right moment was exactly this, exactly now, exactly as she is. He got down on one knee on our kitchen floor, on the tile that had a small chip in the corner, in the apartment that smelled like dinner and coffee and us, and he said the most honest thing anyone has ever said to me. "You are the most real person I have ever known. I want to be with the realest person I have ever known for the rest of my life. Will you marry me?" I said yes before he finished the sentence. I knocked the cereal bowl off the table, and neither of us cared any little bit. It was perfect. It was the most us thing that had ever happened, and it was everything. And then, 3 days later, I made the call that set the next 14 months in motion. I called my parents. I want to be very clear about my state of mind when I made this call. I was not naive. I was not expecting the movie version of this moment. I had been in therapy for 2 years. I had spent significant time working through my relationship with my parents and arriving at what my therapist called realistic emotional expectations, which is a clinical way of saying you know who they are, you accept who they are, you love them for what they can give and not for what you wish they would give you. I was not calling my parents hoping for the big, tearful, movie moment reaction. I wasn't hoping my mother would scream with happiness and my father would say something tender and profound. I had stopped hoping for those things a long time ago, and I was at peace with that. I just wanted to tell them. I wanted my parents to know that my daughter was getting married. That was the entire extent of my hope. A normal, human conversation. A moment of family connection. My mother answered on the third ring. I said, "Mom, hi, I have some news. Daniel proposed. We're engaged." Silence. Not the overwhelmed with joy kind of silence, not the catching her breath kind of silence, the considering kind, the kind where I could feel her rearranging information. And then she said, "Does Madison know yet?" I want you to sit with that for a moment. Not, "Congratulations, sweetheart," not, "Oh my goodness, I'm so happy for you," not, "Tell me everything. When did he propose? What does the ring look like? Are you happy?" Her absolute first response to learning that her daughter was getting married was to ask whether her other daughter had been informed. I told her that no, I was calling family before posting anything, so Madison didn't know yet. She said, "You should tell her soon. You know how she gets when she feels left out of things." And there it was. That sentence, Madison's feelings about my engagement, were the first concern expressed by my mother in response to the news of my engagement. I kept my voice even. I said I would reach out to Madison. I said goodbye. I hung up. My father called back 40 minutes later. He said, "Your mom told me the news. Good. Daniel seems like a stable guy." That was it. That was the full sentence. Daniel seems like a stable guy. I said, "Thanks, Dad." He said, "Okay then, take care of yourself." I put the phone down and stared at the wall for a long moment. Daniel came in from the other room, took one look at my face, and said, "Your parents?" I nodded. He sat down next to me, took my hand, didn't say anything for a moment. And then he said, "What do you need right now?" And I loved him in that moment, for not fixing it, for not minimizing it, for not saying, "At least they called back," or "They probably just don't know how to express it," for just asking what I needed instead of deciding for me. I said, "I need to not let this ruin tonight." So we ordered Thai food from the place on the corner. We sat on the couch and watched a movie. We talked about the wedding, venue ideas, rough guest lists, the kind of vibe we wanted. We let ourselves be happy. I was good at that by then, protecting my own joy from my family. I had been practicing it for years. You learn to build airlocks between the parts of your life, between the thing that wounds you and the thing that heals you, so the damage stays contained, so it doesn't leak into everything. But here is the truth about airlocks. They require constant maintenance, and the pressure on the other side had been building for a long time. Because 2 days after the engagement call, Madison called me, and the moment I heard her voice, something in my stomach tightened, something old and instinctive and exhausted. I answered the phone and I knew before she said a single word that something was coming.
I want to be honest about my sister. I don't tell this story because I hate Madison. I don't. Hate requires a sustained attention that I no longer have the energy for. What I feel about Madison is much more complicated and much sadder than hate. I think Madison was built the way she was built by a family system that told her from the very beginning that she was extraordinary and that the ordinary rules of consideration for others did not fully apply to her. She was given something that looks like love but isn't. It's devotion, which is different. Devotion doesn't see you clearly. It just worships whatever image it has decided you are. And being worshipped by people who don't actually see you clearly makes you lonely in a very specific way. It makes you need more, always more, because nothing ever quite fills the space where actual intimacy should be. I understand that now. It doesn't excuse anything, but I understand it. Madison called me 2 days after my engagement, and her voice was doing a thing it did when she was performing warmth rather than feeling it. Too bright, too much, too fast. She said, "Bree, oh my gosh, Mom told me. I'm just so excited for you. This is wonderful. Daniel is amazing. You two are so great together." And I said, "Thank you, Madison." And I waited, because I knew the but was coming. She said, "So listen, I've been thinking, you know how I've always wanted to have a big, beautiful family event, something really special? And you know Kevin and I have been together for 3 years now." I said, "Okay." She said, "Well, nothing is official yet, obviously, but I just think, with everyone already gathering, it might be such a beautiful opportunity to make it a joint celebration, like your wedding and my, maybe engagement announcement, or even like a joint celebration of both of us. I just think it would be so meaningful, us doing something big together for once, like real sisters." I want to be precise about what she was proposing here, because I think sometimes when I tell this story, people think they understand it, but they miss the full scale of it. She had no engagement ring. She had no proposal. She had no conversation with Kevin about a proposal. There was, as far as I could tell, no imminent plan for any of this to happen. She was suggesting, within 48 hours of hearing about my engagement, that she might leverage the momentum of my wedding to center an event that did not exist yet for a relationship milestone that had not been reached in order to ensure that my wedding became about both of us. She wanted to attach herself to my moment because she couldn't stand for there to be a moment that didn't include her. And the phrase, "like real sisters," I want to talk about that phrase for a second. That phrase was doing a lot of work in that sentence. It was designed to make me feel that if I said no, it was because I wasn't a good sister. It reframed her request as a gesture of closeness rather than what it actually was, a takeover attempt.
It was a manipulation dressed up as an olive branch, and if I hadn't been in therapy for 2 years, it might have worked. But I had language for it now. I knew what was happening. I said, "Madison, I have to go." She said, "Wait, don't be like that." I said, "I'll talk to you later." And I hung up. I immediately called my mother. And my mother, I want you to really hear this, my mother told me I was being selfish. She said, "Your sister is excited for you, Brianna. She's just enthusiastic. You could try being a little more generous with your moment instead of treating it like it belongs only to you." My wedding, my moment, treating it like it belongs only to me. Those words sat in me like stones. Because when she said it, she genuinely believed it. My mother genuinely, completely, with zero self-awareness, believed that my desire to have my own wedding be about my own marriage was a form of greed, that the correct thing to do was to share my moment with someone who hadn't earned it and hadn't asked permission and hadn't even had the grace to pretend that her motives were anything other than what they were. That was the day I stopped trying to explain myself to my mother. Not out of anger, out of clarity, because I finally understood, in my bones, that there was nothing I could say to a woman who believed that sentence. There was no argument that would work. There was no amount of calm, rational, well-organized communication that was going to make my mother see me clearly. She had never seen me clearly. She was not going to start. What I could do, what I would do, was move forward. Plan the wedding I wanted, marry the man I loved, and be very, very clear-eyed about what I was dealing with. I called Kayla that night, told her everything. She listened without interrupting. She's exceptional at that. And then she said something that I have thought about almost every day since. She said, "Bree, I know you don't want to assume the worst, but here's what I know about your family. They don't do things by accident. And your mom and Madison have never once let a big moment of yours pass without finding a way to redirect it. So I have to ask you, what happens if they show up on your wedding day and try something? What's your plan?" I told her I didn't have one. She said, "You need one." I went to bed that night running possibilities. And somewhere in the middle of that night, the answer arrived. We planned the wedding over 14 months, and I want to tell you about this part because I think it tends to get lost in these kinds of stories. People focus on the conflict, on the drama, on the confrontation, but this part, the building part, this was the heart of everything. We chose Asheville, North Carolina. Daniel had taken me to a weekend trip in the early months of our relationship, and I had fallen completely, irreversibly in love with it. The Blue Ridge Parkway in October is one of the most extraordinary things nature has ever produced. Whole mountainsides in flames with red and orange and gold, and the sky this particular shade of blue that you only get at elevation in autumn. It feels like being inside a painting. The venue was called the Ridgeline, a converted barn on the edge of a mountain property with exposed wood beams and Edison string lights and a wraparound deck that looked out over the valley below. When we toured it on a cold January afternoon, I stood on that deck and looked out at those mountains, and I started crying before I even turned back to the venue coordinator. She said, "I'll take that as a yes?" I said, "Yes." We booked that week. Daniel was involved in every decision, which some people found surprising because culturally the wedding is framed as the bride's domain. But Daniel didn't see it that way. He had opinions about music and food and the flow of the evening, and he shared them freely and without ego, which meant our decisions felt genuinely shared. When we disagreed, and we did sometimes, we talked it through like two adults who respected each other's taste. Novel concept, I know. We hired a jazz trio for the cocktail hour and a full band, 7 pieces, for the reception. We chose a menu built around Southern food elevated just enough, fried chicken done right, biscuits that people would still be talking about in a year, a bourbon bar, and a wedding cake that was 4 layers of brown sugar with salted caramel frosting because it was what I actually loved and not what I thought a wedding cake was supposed to be. My dress was the thing I'd seen in a dream and not known I was dreaming. off-shoulder, ivory, delicate lace overlay, cathedral train. I tried it on in a boutique in Nashville on a Saturday morning with Kayla and Renee, and when the consultant fastened the last button and I turned to look in the mirror, I didn't recognize myself at first. Not because I looked different, because I looked exactly like myself, only more so. Like the version of me that I had always suspected was in there had finally found the right exterior. I cried. Kayla cried. Renee, who famously does not cry, made a very controlled sound that was definitely crying and then immediately denied it. I said yes to the dress in under 10 minutes. I asked Tyler to walk me down the aisle instead of my father. That was a decision I made quietly and firmly without apology. Tyler had shown up for me in the ways that mattered. He had called when things were hard, visited when I needed company, understood the dynamics of our family with a clarity and gentleness that made him safe in a way my parents were never. He deserved to be next to me in that moment. When he told me, his voice cracked. He said, "I would be so honored, Bree." That one almost broke me. Now, the pocket.
About 6 months before the wedding, I had that conversation with Kayla, the one where she asked me what my plan was, and I had been thinking about it ever since, and what I had landed on was this. My family had been showing their hand for months, the comments from my mother, Madison's phone calls with her barely veiled suggestions, my father's silence, which I had learned was not neutrality, it was permission. They were going to do something. I didn't know what or when or how far they would go, but Kayla was right. I needed to be ready. So when I went back to the bridal boutique for my final fitting, I asked the seamstress, a meticulous woman named Dolores, if she could add a hidden pocket to the skirt, large enough to hold a phone. She looked at me with an expression that said she had seen some things in her career and added the pocket without asking a single question. The recording went in there 8 weeks before the wedding. The recording that Madison had given me herself without knowing it on a phone call 6 weeks before the day. Let me tell you about the phone call from Patricia. Patricia was the venue coordinator at the Ridgeline, a practical, sharp woman in her 50s who had been doing this for 20 years and had clearly seen enough family drama to last several lifetimes. She called me on a Wednesday afternoon about 6 weeks before the wedding, and she used the careful tone of a person who knows they are about to hand someone a grenade. She said, "Brianna, I want to give you a heads up about something. We received a call this week from a woman who identified herself as your sister, Madison. She had some questions about the venue." I felt my body go still. She continued. She said that Madison had asked about the venue's capacity, the catering packages and how they could be extended or modified, whether additional or adjacent dates were available around mine. And this is the part that still makes my jaw tighten, she had asked whether a booking could be transferred to a different primary contact or whether additional parties could be added to an existing reservation. She had tried to insert herself into my booking. She had called my venue, the venue I had researched and toured and wept on the deck of and paid a deposit for, and attempted without my knowledge and without my permission to negotiate a way to fold herself into my wedding. The working theory, as Patricia and I discussed it, was that Madison had been planning to angle for a joint event, my wedding reception extended or modified to include some kind of announcement or celebration for her, framed as an organic addition to an already planned gathering. The family was coming, the venue was already booked, the caterer was already paid. She just needed to attach herself to the infrastructure of something I had built and make it serve her too. I thanked Patricia. I told her to document the call internally and to not engage with Madison further on any matter related to my event. Patricia said, "Already done." I hung up. I sat with it for exactly 3 minutes, and then I called Madison. She picked up on the second ring, and I knew the instant I heard her voice that she knew I knew. There was a half-second pause before her hello, a slight elevation in pitch, the particular, overly casual tone of someone who has been caught and is deciding how to play it. I didn't give her the opening she was looking for. I said flatly and clearly,
I just got off the phone with the coordinator at my venue. I know you called them. Another pause. And then, and this is what I will never forget, she laughed. Not the apologetic laugh of someone who knows they've been wrong, the dismissive laugh, the laugh that says, "Oh, Bree, it's really not a big deal. I was just exploring options. I just thought..." "Stop. I need you to listen to me." She went quiet. I said, "What you did was a violation. You went behind my back. You contacted my venue without my knowledge to try to alter an event I planned and paid for. You have been treating my wedding as an opportunity for yourself since the day you found out about it. And I'm telling you clearly and directly right now, if you pull anything like this at my wedding, anything at all, you will be removed from that venue. Do you understand me?" There was a long silence. And then Madison's voice changed. The performance dropped, and what came out was the thing underneath. The cold, sharp thing that had always been there, the thing she was usually careful to keep covered. She said, "You have always done this. You act like everything is such a catastrophic injustice. You have been holding some grudge against me our entire lives, and I am so tired of it. You are jealous, Brianna. You have always been jealous. You couldn't stand that I had things you didn't. You couldn't stand that Mom and Dad were proud of me. And now you have this one moment where you're the center of attention, and you can't even enjoy it without making it a whole thing because deep down you know it won't last. Kevin is probably going to propose soon, and when he does, and when we have our wedding, it is going to be everything yours is and more, and everyone will come and celebrate us, and nobody will have to sit through another lecture about how unfair Brianna Calloway's life has been." I let her finish, and then I said, "Goodbye, Madison." I ended the call. I stopped the recording. I played it back once, and then I saved it to my cloud storage, emailed it to myself, and texted the file to Kayla with a message that said, "Keep this somewhere safe." That evening, I sat down with Daniel and told him everything. The venue call, the confrontation, the recording, all of it. I showed him the file. He listened the way he always listened, completely, without interrupting, without jumping to fix things before I had finished. And when I was done, he was quiet for a moment, and then he held my face in both of his hands, like he was making sure I was looking directly at him, and he said, "Brianna, whatever they do, whatever happens, I am right there beside you. We are walking through this together, and on the other side of this day, it's just going to be us, okay?" I said, "Okay." He said, "Now put the phone in your dress pocket and let's go pick out napkin colors." I laughed, really laughed, and the tension in my chest broke open like a window on a spring morning. We picked the napkins, dusty rose to match the peonies. October 14th. I want to start with the morning. I want to start there because the morning was perfect, and I need you to know that before everything else. I need the whole story, not just the dramatic part. The mountains were burning. I stepped outside the inn where the bridal party was staying at 7 in the morning and stood on the porch with bare feet and a coffee cup and just looked. Reds and deep golds and burnt orange and the particular amber that only happens in October at that elevation. The whole landscape lit from within like a painting made of actual fire. The air was sharp and clean and cold in that precise way that feels like someone put it there specifically for you. I thought, whatever happens today, I am going to be married in this. The bridal suite was everything. We had it from 8 a.m., me and Kayla and Renee and Tyler's wife, Janelle, who had become one of my closest friends over the past 2 years. We had champagne and a fruit spread, and someone had made a playlist that was 2 hours of the best feel-good music I have ever heard in my life, and we got ready to that playlist with the windows open and the mountain air coming through. Kayla did my hair, Renee handled the crisis when the florist arrived and 2 of the boutonnieres were slightly the wrong shade. She made 1 call and had it resolved in 11 minutes, while not breaking a sweat. Janelle made me eat something because she is practical and correct in all things. Daniel had left a note under my door at 6 that morning, a handwritten note on the inn's stationery. It said, "Brianna, I woke up at 5 a.m. because I was too excited to sleep. I've been lying here thinking about the fact that by tonight, you'll be my wife. I genuinely cannot believe I get this. I'll be the one at the altar completely falling apart. I love you more than I know how to say. See you soon. Daniel. I read it 4 times, I put it in my bag, I have it still. Getting into the dress was its own ceremony. Dolores, my seamstress, who I had asked to come and help me, fastened each button with the kind of focused care that made the whole thing feel like sacred. When she was finished, Kayla stood in front of me and looked at me for a long moment and then said very quietly, "Brianna, you look like you." That's the best compliment I have ever received in my life. At 3:30 p.m., Tyler knocked on the door of the suite. He was in his suit, charcoal to match the groomsman, and his tie was slightly crooked and his eyes were already red. He took one look at me and went completely still. He said, "Oh, man." I said, "You have to not cry yet, Tyler. I just did my makeup." He said, "I'm not crying. I'm experiencing severe allergies." I hugged him. He held on for a long moment. He said, into my hair, "I am so proud of you. I just need you to know that." I said, "I know. I love you." We walked to the ceremony venue together, an outdoor covered pavilion looking out over the valley. We walked to the ceremony together, an outdoor covered pavilion looking out over the valley. The ceremony began at 4 o'clock exactly.
Kayla and Renee walked down the aisle to a jazz arrangement of a song Daniel and I had loved since our first months of long distance. Something warm and full of feeling, the kind of music that lives in your chest. Then Janelle, then Tyler's daughter, 4 years old and scattering rose petals with the extreme seriousness of someone who understood the gravity of the assignment. And then Tyler and I stood at the top of the aisle together. I heard the music change. I heard the crowd rise. I looked down that aisle, all that wood and candlelight, and 200 faces turned toward me. And at the end of it, at the altar, was Daniel, in his charcoal suit, with his hands clasped in front of him and tears running openly down his face exactly like he had promised. He wasn't wiping them, he wasn't embarrassed, he was just standing there, fully in it, letting himself feel everything. I lost my composure for exactly 3 seconds. Then I found it again. Tyler whispered, "Ready?" I said, "More than anything." We walked. The ceremony was, I want to say it was perfect, but perfect feels too clean. It was true. That's the better word. Every word that was spoken was true. The officiant, a friend of Daniel's from college who had gotten ordained specifically for this, had spent 3 months getting to know us both and crafted a ceremony that felt like it had been written for exactly the 2 of us and no one else. When we exchanged personal vows, which we had written separately and not shared, the overlap in what we had written made people gasp, not because we had coordinated, because we knew each other. I said, "I choose you not because you are perfect, but because with you I finally understand what it means to be chosen." He said, "I will spend every day making sure you know that you are not too much. You are exactly enough. You are exactly right." The officiant had moved us into the ring exchange when it happened. A sound from the back of the room, not a natural sound, not a guest arriving late, not a child restless, the specific sound of disruption, of someone entering a space with intention to cause a scene. I heard my mother's voice before I turned around. She was at the back of the pavilion, moving toward the center aisle, speaking in a voice pitched to Carrie. My father was behind her, and behind him was Madison in a white dress. Cream, technically, but white enough to make everyone who saw it go still. A white dress. My mother had somehow gotten hold of one of the wireless microphones from the DJ table. I found out later she had asked a staff member to see the sound equipment setup under the guise of checking whether her hearing aids would interfere with the audio, and while his back was turned, she had pocketed the mic. She had planned this. She walked up the center aisle and she raised that microphone and she said, "I'm sorry to interrupt everyone, but I think before this ceremony goes any further, there are some things that the people here should know. This family has been excluded from this wedding.
Brianna has kept her own parents at arm's length through this entire planning process. She has been selfish with her time, with her choices, and with this celebration. And her sister, Madison, who loves her and has always supported her, deserves to be acknowledged today. Our family deserves to be acknowledged. We didn't raise our daughters to treat family like an afterthought. We raised them to put family first, and I will not. She kept going. I don't remember the exact words after that because I had already begun walking. The room was completely silent. 200 people and not a single sound except my mother's voice and my heels on the floor as I moved toward her. I heard Daniel turning, of Kayla taking a step. I raised one hand very slightly in Daniel's direction. I've got this, without breaking my stride. I reached my mother. I looked at her. I looked at my father standing behind her. I looked at Madison in her white dress with her arms crossed. And then I reached into the hidden pocket of my wedding dress, and I will never stop being grateful to Dolores for that pocket, and I took out my phone. Unlocked, recording file already open. I took the microphone from my mother's hand, gently, without a word. She looked at me with an expression that was part triumph. She thought I was going to speak, to explain myself, to justify myself the way I had always justified myself to her, and part uncertainty, because something in my face told her that this time was different. I held the phone to the microphone. I pressed play. Madison's voice came through those speakers, clear and sharp and unmistakable, filling the entire pavilion, rolling out over the valley below. You always act like everything is such a big deal. You've been holding this grudge against me our whole lives. You're jealous, Brianna. You've always been jealous. You couldn't stand that Mom and Dad were proud of me, and now you have this one moment where you're the center of attention and you can't even enjoy it. And Kevin is probably going to propose soon, and when he does, and when we have our wedding, it's going to be everything yours is and more. And everyone will come and celebrate us, and nobody will have to sit through another lecture about how unfair Brianna Calloway's life has been. 47 seconds. The silence that came after was the most profound silence I have ever been inside of. Not awkward, not uncomfortable, the silence of 200 people understanding something all at once. I lowered the microphone. I did not look at Madison. I looked at my mother. I held her gaze for a long moment. And then I turned away from her, away from all of them, and I faced my guests. And I said into that microphone, in the clearest and steadiest voice I have ever used, I am so grateful that every person in this room chose to be here today. If you're here because you love me and because you love Daniel, please stay. We still have a wedding to finish. Anyone who needs to leave, the door is behind you. Silence. And then, starting somewhere in the middle of the crowd, spreading outward, applause. My parents walked out. Madison walked out. Kevin stayed. The officiant, a man named Greg, who I will love until the end of my life, waited until the room was settled. Then he adjusted his notes. He looked at Daniel. He looked at me. He said, with the calm of a man who has seen some things, "Shall we continue?" Daniel looked at me with a smile that was so full of love, it was almost too much to look at directly. He said, "Let's get married." And we did. We got married. Fully, completely, beautifully, irrevocably married. The rest of the ceremony lasted 11 minutes and was the most peaceful 11 minutes of my life. Greg had us exchange rings and say our final I do's, and then he said, "By the power vested in me by the state of North Carolina, and more importantly, by the power of the two of you, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Daniel kissed me for longer than was technically appropriate, and nobody minded a little bit. We walked back up the aisle to the sound of the whole room cheering. I want to tell you about the reception, because the reception was extraordinary in a way I need you to understand. 212 people, minus 3, who had just witnessed something none of them had planned to witness, and who had made a collective decision to stay and be present anyway. And the effect of that, the warmth and the intention that filled that barn that night, was unlike anything I have ever felt. People danced. Really danced. Daniel's grandmother, a woman named Dolores, 2 Doloreses in this story and both of them legends, pulled me on the floor during the 3rd song of the reception and taught me a 2-step she had been doing since 1974. She was 81 years old and she absolutely outperformed me. Tyler's toast made the room laugh and cry in equal measure. He talked about watching me grow up, about the things only he had seen, about who I was when nobody was scoring me. He ended with, "Brianna, you have always deserved exactly this. I'm just glad you finally got it." I had to step outside for 2 minutes to collect myself after that. Kayla and Renee slow danced together during a ballad and basically made everyone in the room fall in love with them. My colleague Marcus did something unspeakable with the Macarena at approximately 10 p.m. that I will take to my grave. And Daniel and I, we danced every slow song together, every single one. He held me like he was saying something with his hands, like he was saying, "I know what happened today. I know what it cost, and I am right here."
We drove to the inn at midnight with cake in a to-go box and wedding shoes in our hands. He carried me over the threshold of our room, which I told him was not necessary and which I wanted entirely, and we sat on the bed in our wedding clothes and ate the cake and talked for 2 hours about everything and nothing and the whole enormous, unbelievable fact of the day we had just been through. In the weeks that followed, I was reached out to by so many people who had been there. Guests I barely knew, family friends from Maryville who had come and who called to say they had no idea, they were so sorry, they were so proud of me. Daniel's family, his mother, his aunts, his college friends, who reached out with such specific and generous love that I had to keep reminding myself I was allowed to receive it. Kevin reached out about 2 weeks post-wedding. He and Madison had broken up. He said that what he had seen and heard that day, not just the recording, but the whole picture it revealed, was something he couldn't unsee. He was kind and he was sad, and I felt genuinely sorry for him because he had loved her, and he was only now beginning to understand who she was. Tyler and I talked more in those weeks than we had in the previous 2 years. He was clear-eyed about our family in a way he hadn't been when we were growing up, and he was grieving some of the same things I was, the parents we had needed versus the parents we had gotten. We held that together. My parents sent a letter. I opened it. I read it. It was not an apology, it was an explanation, and it was a justification, and it was a document written by 2 people trying to reframe an event they had participated in so that they came out looking less like the villains they had been. There were phrases like, "You have to understand the context," and "We only wanted," and "Madison has always been sensitive," and "We never intended." There was not a single sentence that said, "We were wrong, we hurt you, we are sorry." I folded the letter up. I put it in the same drawer that had held my blue ribbon from the science fair 20 years earlier. I did not respond. I want to explain that choice because I think it's important. I didn't not respond because I was punishing them. I didn't not respond because I was still consumed by anger. I wasn't by then. I didn't respond because there was nothing to respond to. An explanation is not an apology. A justification is not an acknowledgement. And the energy required to write back, to engage, to enter the cycle of reaching out and being disappointed one more time, I had spent that energy for 30 years. I had used all of it up. The kindest thing I could do for myself was stop. Some cups have holes in the bottom. You can keep filling them, and they will never hold water. It doesn't mean the cup is evil. It means the cup is broken in a specific way that no amount of water can fix. And at some point, you have to put down the pitcher. I put down the pitcher. Daniel and I flew to Costa Rica 3 days after the wedding for our honeymoon. We spent 10 days in a small house on a hillside in the Nicoya Peninsula, with a porch that looked over the Pacific and howler monkeys in the trees at dawn, and the particular quality of silence that exists when you are very far away from your ordinary life. We ate fish tacos and drank strong coffee and read books and went to bed early and slept the deep, dreamless sleep of people who have survived something. On the last night, we sat on the porch and watched the sun go down over the ocean. It went slowly, the way Pacific sunsets do, generously, as if it knows how beautiful it is and wants to give everyone enough time. Daniel said, "You were the calmest person in that room, you know." I looked at him for a moment. I said,
I had been getting ready for that moment my whole life. I just didn't know that was what I was getting ready for. He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "I think you were always going to be okay, no matter what. I think you were that kind of person." I thought about the blue ribbon in the drawer, the Sunday dinners where I made myself invisible, the years of building myself in secret, in the dark, through the cracks. I said, "Yeah, I think I was." The sun finished setting, the stars came out, more stars than I can describe, the kind of sky that makes you feel very small and very lucky all at once. I exhaled, all the way, every last bit of air. For the first time in 30 years, I wasn't bracing for anything. If you made it to the end of this story, I want you to know something. That means something. You stayed with me through all of it, and that is not a small thing. I share stories like this not because I enjoy revisiting the pain. I don't. I share them because I absolutely know, that somewhere out there right now, there is a woman sitting in a family that has told her 1,000 different ways that she is the supporting cast in someone else's story, that her moments are smaller, that her needs are less urgent, that wanting things for herself is a form of greed. She is quietly building herself in the dark. She is getting better at performing fine. She is wondering if it ever gets different. This one is for her. It gets different, not because the people who hurt you change. They often don't. It gets different because you change, because at some point you stop asking for permission to take up space. You stop waiting for the audience that was never going to clap for you. You build the life anyway. You marry the person who sees you anyway. You stand at the altar anyway. And when they come for you, and sometimes they do come for you, you reach into your pocket and you are ready. If this story touched something in you, please share it. Someone in your life needs to hear it today. Post it, send it, text it to the friend you've been worried about. These stories are only as powerful as the distance they travel. If you're not subscribed yet, please do. Hit the bell. Come back, because I have more to say, and I intend to say it all of it. I'm Brianna Calloway. I am a wife, a storyteller, a daughter who chose herself, and a woman who keeps a very good playlist in her phone. I'm not going anywhere. Thank you for being here.